Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining our meeting, our webinar today on renting in Ghana. Um, we are looking forward to an exciting conversation um, on the different aspects of renting and ready to provide you valuable information that can help you navigate the Ghanaian rental market properly. So we have with us here Mr. Lester, who is part Benzi Angel, Lecture, and Ankuma. Then we have with us Delali Sylvester Hazi, who is the Facilities Manager for Golden Coast Developers. And then we have Mr. Emmanuel Teria, who is the President for the Ghana Real Estate Professionals Association and the lead broker at Golden Page Realty. So, gentlemen and lady, thank you all so much for taking time out of your Saturday to join us. I'd, I wanted us to do a quick introduction of each other, and I'd like for Elizabeth to start. If she can just give us a brief introduction of herself and what she does. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry, I'm trying to arrange the brightness, but in the meantime, hello, it's a pleasure to be here. As Patrick said, my name's Elizabeth. I'm a partner with Bensi Encho, Lecture and Kuma. We're a leading corporate commercial firm in Ghana, but I'm dual qualified, so I'm qualified both in the United Kingdom and also in Ghana. And I largely deal with real estate and infrastructure projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. We'll move on to Emmanuel now. Emmanuel, if you could please introduce yourself.
All right, thank you, Patrick, and thank you to the whole team for putting this together. My name is Emmanuel Teria, Emmanuel M. Teria. I am the president of the Ghana Real Estate Professionals Association, which is a real estate professional association that promotes ethical standard. We promote professional standard of real estate practice, just to make sure that the consumer and the brokers or the professional industry is being protected in a very well-mannered way. And GREPA has been in existence for over 15 years. We have done so much for the industry just to make sure that we are operating in a safe and professional, industry. And we are more or less the main intermediary between landlords and, tenant, the first point of call. And of course, if you contact a professional, the way you get result is different from when you do not. And so I'm also the lead broker for Golden Page Realty. It is a brokerage institution. So we help property owners sell and rent their properties, as well as we help prospective buyers, prospective tenants, and we manage properties as well. So in short, this is about me and the organization I represent, which is the Ghana Real Estate Professionals Association, for this important discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. And then finally to Delali.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. This is Delali. I'm operations manager, but for this conversation, facilities manager for Golden Coast Developers. We are a private real estate firm located in Accra. Most of our properties are located in the Laboni cantonments, and then we have one in East Legon, an apartment complex. So what we achieve, or what we try to do, is we try to bring an African feel to our local real estate. worked in so many places, and usually what they offer is kind of the bland European style of buildings to 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 people who want to rent, but we want to break the mold. We want to do it differently. So we apply a traditional African touch to luxury real estate in Ghana. And that's in a nutshell what we do. We have rental properties and we also have properties that we sell, all with a traditional African touch um, that we sell along with them. So that's basically it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Delali,
Yeah.
for that introduction. So I think we'll move straight into the conversation. For those of us joining, just a few quick house rules. If you're not speaking, we would appreciate it if you can mute your microphones. If you could also turn your videos off. If you have any questions, please feel free to text into the chat box or notes them down for the Q&A sessions once we get there. So we have this webinar or this conversation broken down into about 4 main areas. We'll take the bit by bit and address some of the concerns there. And we'll just kickstart into the general real estate rental market landscape. So I think I'll just throw this question first to the agent because this is more of a availability question. So Manuel, to you, what are the realistic rental prices monthly in Accra, Kumasi, other major urban city areas? And is it possible to break this down into the property types and then the neighborhoods?
All right, thank you. The agency or the rental market is very important. So let me start, this way. We all know that the real estate industry is quite broad, and we have, rental properties, we have homes that are being bought for residents, we have commercial, we have industrial, we have farming, and the rest. But particularly speaking on rental, we all know rental market is one of the most important segments in our country, the Ghana housing sector. And every blessed day, we have thousands of individuals and families that are looking for properties to, lay their heads. And majority, or about 80% of these numbers, are basically looking to rent. And unfortunately, we have a shortfall where we have more demand compared to the supply. We had a stakeholder engagement, I think 3 days ago, with the Real Estate Agency Council and other stakeholders, Lands Commission, Bank of Ghana. And it came out that, annually, we supply about 40,000 instead of 200,000, supply that the economy need. And most of the pressure, especially, is within the major cities. Kumasi, and we all know Accra is like where everybody want to be. That's the national capital, and that is where a lot of businesses want to be. And so the rental market is very important. And as a professional real estate practitioner, we don't simply just connect homeowner and then the landlord, and then that's the end. We go deeper. The work of the broker or the agent in this perspective is very important. So we help to verify property ownership. So you get to know who the owner of the property is before you even pay, so that you can save yourself, some comfort and make sure that you are not throwing money away. We help screen prospective tenant just to make sure that we have the right people, support documentation, the rest. Now, I'd like to acknowledge that the rental sector faces some challenges, rising housing costs, limited supply, and advanced rent concerns and the likes. So I'll narrow it down to the question that is being asked as to what prices are there for our market, looking at Kumasi and Greater Accra. I think this is where most of the larger population want to reside, and that drives the price of the market. Economists will tell you that where there is high demand, the supply is limited. It causes price to go up. So price elasticity and all those things come in. However, if you come to Accra, I would like to explain the category of unit or accommodation that are available, starting with the apartment aspect. So we have the apartment. You can have a one-bedroom apartment, a two-bedroom apartment, or even a studio. And now we have a local way of calling some of these ones. So a studio locally, we call it a single room self-contained. And then, a one-bedroom, we say chamber and hall, especially when we are dealing with the locals. These are terms that you hear a lot. And then we have two-bedroom apartment. Sometimes you hear two-bedroom self-contained. These are categories of unit. We have the semi-detached, we have the detached homes, the terraces, which are not too common. And olden days, we used to have what we call the compound house, where you have a lot of people sharing the same, let's say washroom and bathroom, kitchen and all that. Sometimes people even cook just in front of their doors. These are also kind of fading out into this, fading out. And we have the sort of more structured, more decent type of accommodation now, which are more decent and comfortable for professionals and middle class. And so on average, I'll take a studio, a one-bedroom, and a two-bedroom. Unless otherwise, we can go to three-bedroom, self-compound, four-bedroom houses, but the larger market, they focus on studio, one bed, two bed. And these categories are the larger population, young graduate, national service, young professional, young couple trying to start up life. These are where majority of the concentration is. Now, as the ranks keep growing, then attention moves to let's settle with a three-bedroom self-compound or a three-bedroom apartment, and have the other areas, for instance, gated communities and that of high-rise building like Sylvester's End, for instance. So I would like to look at. I'll give you average prices for areas like
Okay.
East Legon, Osu, let's say Easter Port and the likes.
Yeah.
Typically, if you are looking for a studio, one or more or less like a single room self-contained, within these areas, you should budget between 700 to 1,200. If you are looking at
Sorry, is that in CDs or in US dollars?
the prices are in CDs. The prices are in CDs. Now, and these are like the lower class. So depending on your taste, the more you want, the more you pay, actually. And these are also prices of properties that are not furnished. So it doesn't come with furniture. It just, you have the room. Maybe sometimes you may get air conditioning, sometimes you may not get. So these are some of the prices that you may end up getting. East Legon, between, okay, so let's take one bedroom. One bedroom, we can have 1,500 to 2,000 cities around these areas. If you take a two bedroom, these areas, you should be looking at between 3,000, 2,000 maybe to some can go as high as 15,000, depending on the taste, depending on the finishing, So these are basic areas. And if you come to a lower section, like let's say Medina, Achimota, Hacho, the mid-range Spinters, the prices are also a bit lower. And you may get, properties that are in these areas with decent prices, just that most of the time they are more competitive. So you end up looking at what will work better for you. The location is important, where the property is located, whether it's cantonment. If you are going towards Adenta, you are going to get good prices. So a two-bedroom that will cost you, let's say, 10,000 cedis in East Legon. If you go to say Adenta or Medina, you can be getting between 3,000 and then 5,000 within these areas, which I think makes the market more competitive. And Kumasi is also not too different, except that prices in Accra are more higher compared to prices in Kumasi. And Kumasi, as of early 2026, the average rent, let me even give you per square meter, is like 25 cedis per square meter, So you can see how these prices also work in Kumasi. They are not too different from Accra, just that Accra is more on a higher side. And, you can also look at how increments are being done. But I'd like to end here so that you can go to the other panelists. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was a very loaded answer. You were attempting to answer all the questions I have before we finish the webinar. Thank you so much. Delali, we've heard what Emmanuel has said, but I want to just add another component to the question, and then you can touch a bit on that in terms of you guys, your company, that's Golden Coast Developers. You've been in development for a while, so you've seen certain changes and certain trends over a certain period, maybe a 5 to 10 year period. And can you just share with us, piggying back on what Emmanuel has said, what the change in demand has been over the last few years? So what are people looking for today in the rental market? So what are the tenants looking for? What are the landlords looking for?
Okay, so basically, the changes that have been occurring in the past, you said 10 years, right? So it's with the way things are going on these days, Accra is attracting a lot of foreign investment. So we have a lot of foreigners, we have a lot of foreign investors moving into the country. Some of them are moving in with their families. Some of them are coming here temporarily. Some of them are also contractors coming to work on projects for a period of time. So all these people are either investing into properties here or renting. So one thing that is going on a lot is people are also looking for that foreign touch in a lot of these buildings that are coming up in Ghana. So it's also influencing the way our developers are also putting up those buildings with how they look. People are doing a lot of foreign touches like the glass curtains in front of the buildings, the cantilever style of concrete work where a part of the building projects over the ground floor and all that. So it's shaping our industry, and it's even shaping our buildings. It's also shaping the prices, I'll have to add, because these days rental prices are also going up between 5 to 10% every year. Some developers choose to absorb the costs, and some don't. So it's a spread between who is going to accept those costs and who isn't. And usually the issue now is that demand is actually outpacing supply. That's the main problem with our industry, which is forcing the industry to become a buyer's market. Sorry, is becoming a stronghold for um, the landlords, I should say. So because supply is actually outstripping demand because of the housing deficits that I believe was it Ishan alluded to, the last speaker. He
Yes,
alluded to that
Emmanuel.
there was a short. Yeah, Emmanuel. Okay, thank you. Emmanuel alluded to. So it's actually putting a stronghold in the hands of landlords, which is actually allowing them to control the market. So that is the main thing. Because right now, with the way people are coming in with a lot of money, um, they are the ones controlling the market. Money controls the market now. So that's the main trend with our market right now. There's something going
Okay.
on with the screen.
Yeah, yes, I think Emmanuel is having some technical challenges.
Oh,
Emmanuel, if
okay.
you can hear us, I think your whiteboard is showing. So um, if you could please exit it for us. Yes.
Okay, I'm trying to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay. Yes, Delali, please.
Yeah. So uh, like I was saying, this gives tenants very little bargaining power in this market because at the very least, with most of the buildings that have very high demand, especially the luxurious buildings, um, mostly the foreigners usually control that market. Foreigners, I'll say foreigners, but people who are coming into the country to work and all that, they actually control the luxury end of the market, leaving little for um, people who actually want to bargain and have a say in the market, uh, have a say because of that. So in a nutshell, basically, most of the purchasing power lies with the landlords these days, rather than with rather than with the tenants. The thing on the screen is very distracting.
Yeah, please give me a minute to sort this thing out. 1 second, please. I apologize.
Is it possible to block the screen share? That could help.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
we're getting that sorted out. Right.
Thank you. Emmanuel, can you log off and log back in? That may help.
Yeah, that may help.
Okay, let me try that.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think we're fine now. All right. Apologies for that. This thing keeps speaking. Okay, I think we're fine. Thank you. Okay, I think I know where the issue is. It's all sorted now. I think it was a note taken. Apologies for that distraction. Okay, Dalali, Sorry for the distraction. Is that, or would you want to add in a little more?
Okay, no, that's all. That's all for that question. If anybody
Okay.
would like to catch up or ask a question, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you so much. Um, thank you for that insight. And I think what I will do next, I think Elizabeth has something to add on.
Hi, Patrick.
Yes.
I think really everything has been said,
Okay.
so I don't have anything to add for this particular question.
Okay. But while we have you on, I'll just ask you in terms of cost, because you're the legal person. We know there's been a lot of conversation on what the costing for real estate looks like. I mean, rental markets, what agents are charging, different things. So, what costs are expected to be paid for stated rents? Are we looking at beyond the stated rents? Are you just looking at paying for the rent? Are you looking at other fees included? What should one consider? What should a prospective tenant consider when approaching this? When approaching this?
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Yes, I mean, aside from the rent, of course, it depends on the type of building that the tenant will be renting premises. So if it's, an apartment block, then there'll of course normally be service charges that need to be paid, and that will comprise, cleaning, communal areas, lighting, generator, fuel, etc. In terms of professional fees, we always advise clients, to instruct a lawyer to review your agreement. Generally speaking, in terms of legal fees, the Ghana Bar of Association have a scale of fees, and it's generally in accordance with the value of the land or the value of the transaction. It's normally on a percentage basis. But generally, you'll find lawyers who are more reasonable than others. But I would always recommend that the legal fees is a consideration. But if you have a good lawyer who's able to review your agreement upfront, you will definitely probably save costs if there are issues that, transpire during the term of your tenancy if you hadn't engaged a lawyer upfront just to review your tenancy agreement. And whether you're a tenant or a landlord, just to make sure that it's balanced and, there are reasonable protections there for both sides.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there's no specific fee. It will depend on if the lawyers are going by the Ghana Bar Association rates, it will depend on the rental. Somebody speaking? Yes, it will depend on the rental
Okay.
or the value of
Okay.
the land. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So, just to stay with you, on the payments and the cost, when we look at rent advances and payments, I think the norm here in Ghana is to demand for the landlords to demand about a year's rental payment or 2 years rental payment. Uh, I know there's a Rent Act that is um, in place that we have to follow. Is this lawful for landlords to demand payments or advances that the Act doesn't recommend? And on the second line, why do landlords do this? Why do they demand, these extreme or exorbitant fees for rental advances?
Under the Rent Act, the Rent Act provides that 6 months' rent should be paid by tenants in advance. That's what the Rent Act provides. And what's unlawful is if, for example, a landlord is demanding a certain amount of rent beyond 6 months as a requirement to enter into the tenancy agreement. But if the parties agree, to pay rent more than 6 months, I mean, providing there's no coercion, it's fine. But generally speaking, under the Rent Act, it's 6 months rent that has to be paid in advance. There's also a rent bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, and that rent bill provides, so if it is made into law, it will provide that the landlords can actually request 1 year's rent in advance. Now, normally landlords will require rent in advance because they want to ensure that they have some money in place in the event that the tenant fails to pay their rent or fails to comply with certain terms of the lease. So that's generally speaking why landlords request rent in advance. You have other jurisdictions where it's quite common for tenants just to pay their rent monthly, or to perhaps pay a 3 months rent deposit with rent monthly. So it really does depend on the nature of the property. But generally speaking, we are seeing more landlords require security deposits, normally 6 months or a year, and then tenants can then pay their rent monthly. But it is basically down to negotiation. But back to your first question, the Rent Act does provide that landlords should not demand more than 6 months rent in advance. Patrick, you're muted.
Yes. Okay. So then that makes it clear. But I think some of my observations have been that for many landlords, it's either you're paying the advance as a whole, there's no room for negotiation. So can you as a tenant negotiate your rent? Is it possible to say, okay, maybe instead of paying this 2 years, can I pay this? Because I've had or heard instances where the prospective tenant is saying, okay, I can only maybe pay 3 months or 6 months. And the landlord says it's 1 year or nothing, or it's 2 years or nothing. Do people have the right, do tenants have the right to negotiate rent advances?
Yes, ultimately rent, and just like other provisions in the tenancy agreement, are negotiable. But obviously it's the landlord who owns the property, and especially if it's a landlord's market, they will have more bargaining power. But ultimately the tenant can seek to try and negotiate. But if the landlord is very strict with his requirements, it means that the negotiation isn't working. And so that's what happens. Normally the tenant is forced to meet the landlord's requirements or look for alternative properties that meet the tenant's capability in terms of the rent that they can afford.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think I'll throw the same question to Emmanuel. You're a broker, you represent prospective tenants or tenants who want to get places to live. What has been your experience with negotiating rent advances and payments?
Okay, thank you, Patrick. I think I'll add up to the question with regards to the fees that Elizabeth answered. Elizabeth didn't add the broker fees. So obviously there are agency fees as well, or broker fees. I mean, if I, as a professional, help you to secure a place, help you with the other stuff, and Elizabeth work on the documentation, I also expect to get my daily bread from that as well. So that is additional fee that is also that comes along with the rent or even sale. Back to the question on the negotiation regarding the rent. Rent is negotiable, and like she said, the Rent Act, that is 1963, is what we are operating with now, even though we know there is a bill that is coming with a new rent law. But this is what we have now, and it stipulates only 6 months. Like she said, is by negotiation or by decision between both parties. So if both parties agree, but what we mostly see in the industry is this. I have worked with landlords who agreed to do 6 months, but the problem that came after that is where the major challenges are. Now, he was not demanding 2 years, but he requested for a 12-month rent. And the tenant requested that, let me do 6 months, and then give me 6 months into that period, then I'll top up. So this is what happened. The agreement was signed for 1 year, but payment was made for the first 6 months. Then on the 5th month, the rest of the 6 months will be done. I have 2 or 3 examples of this. What happened at the end of the day was that the tenants did not honor their word. So they end up owing the landlord into the 7th month and even more, to the point that eviction has to come in. Some we had to take to rent control. So these are some of the challenges that we face. But of course, it's negotiable. And I don't support this is what the law is saying, 6 months. But if there is an agreement for 12 months, good enough. If there's an agreement for 24 months, especially if it is proposed by the tenant, it is not, the landlord or the landlady that is asking for. But if out of the willingness of the tenant, he says or she says, I want to do 12 months or 36 months or 24 months, good enough. So it is negotiable. And the other challenge is the fact that people do not honor their words. And I think it's also because the systems and structures for collecting some of these, payments are not in place. Like, let's say you go to, let me use UK or US system. If you are supposed to pay on monthly basis, there's a system that can even automatically deduct you. So the only institution that people are more comfortable with giving 6 months or less is, 1, if it is a corporate institution; 2, an international organization; 3, a banking institution. Bankers, if you issue a check and it's being dishonored, your job is at stake. So that is more or less like a security for homeowners. And
Okay.
the challenges are more, but that is what I can say on that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Thank you for the additional insight. Delali, I'll come to you now. So, we are talking about rental payments and advances. I know you work with a developer, so what I want to throw to you is, for your projects and developments that you have, that are being rented by the developer. There's the rent to own model schemes that are becoming quite popular now. Something that we're about to we are hearing a bit more about here in Ghana, with a few people implementing. Is that something that you practice where you work? And if so, how practical and viable is this model for you? And I mean, if you are implementing this, you can let us know if you know of any other organizations implementing this. We'll be happy to know. Thank you.
Okay, so with rent to own, I've never really come face to face with it before. I've never used rent to own in any of my properties. We don't rent to own in our properties, but I do know of other properties where it's being used. I know of other people who are implementing it in the industry. And yes, it is actually very viable. People who I've spoken to, uh, they have mentioned that it's viable. There are actually um, models, or there are agencies that actually enable renters to exploit this. I think in Ghana we have the National Home Ownership Fund that operates affordable housing rent to own scheme to bridge the gap between renting and ownership for middle to low income earners in Ghana. So, and then there are also a few companies that I know who also embrace this as well. And then, yeah, so that's it for rent to own. I know of a few other companies too who also do it. I think Val engages in rent to own, and Regimano and Def Traco, they also engage in rent to own, but we don't engage it ourselves. I'm open to it. If there's anybody out there who also wants to engage me on it, that's fine. But that's it for rent to own. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Elizabeth, Emmanuel, I don't know if any of you have a few words to add to this. What your thoughts are on the rent or scheme and module? Maybe Elizabeth, from a legal perspective, is this considering the landscape of our industry, is this something that is right to implement in this time?
I think so. I think particularly, during, let's say, the previous years where it was quite difficult for people to own property in terms of even trying to obtain financing, right? Our interest rates were very high. So for people to get onto the property ladder, it can be quite difficult. So having a rent to own scheme gives people the opportunity to pay monies as rent and then eventually own their property. Of course, when you have a mortgage, there are more strict requirements. So if you don't pay your mortgage on time, of course, the lender can enforce. So I think the rent to own schemes currently in Ghana, I mean, I know, as has been said, there are a few private developers that are doing it, but we're seeing a lot of government schemes implementing it, particularly for civil servants. So I think it's great if it's a way for more people to be able to acquire their properties. I think we're moving in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Emmanuel, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I think I'll add a little. Currently, we don't have a lot of rent to own properties in Ghana, but I think it needs to get to a national level because the cost of production is mostly the case. So getting investment to put into the project today so that you get the returns in the future with economic variables, currency fluctuations, inflation, cost of building materials and all that. That is the reason why I think we don't have a lot of it. But if we have a system or we have the funds, we have the structure or a strategy that can work easier and better. For instance, for the next 10 years, if you are renting to own, that's a very laudable one. Very, very superb. Like the lady said, the National Home Ownership Scheme, they are doing it. But which part of the country, which part of the city are they doing it? How many people are interested in it? When it comes to the prime areas, you wouldn't get this because it is more like capital intensive zone, investment driven. And so investors are looking to get the returns now so that they can, build more or expand the business. So I think this calls for a national dialogue. It calls for a holistic approach to see what strategy we need to use and how we can improve it. But it's a very laudable, concept. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your inputs. I hope we are learning. We are learning a lot from this. In the meantime, I'd just like to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box or you can note them down. Once we get to the Q&A session, we can take them. Okay. So we're speaking about the landscape. Next thing, and I think it's a very important and critical issue, is tenancy agreements and verification processes. So Elizabeth, I'll be coming to you a lot more on this because I think that's your field, and then we'll move on to Delali and the others. So I'll put two questions in one. Is signing a tenancy agreement necessary? Do I need to have whatever agreement with the landlord put down on paper. I can just say, hey, I want to rent a place for 12 months. It's 500 cedis. I pay you upfront. And then the next one would be, what should the tenancy agreement essentially contain? What are some of the non-negotiable clauses that, um, even for the layman, if I may put it, on the ordinary homeowner, what are some of the clauses that should be in a tenancy agreement that are non-negotiable?
Thanks, Patrick. So generally speaking, agreements in writing relating to property is always advisable. But under the law, if a tenancy agreement or an interest is being created which is less than 3 years, doesn't necessarily need to be in writing. But I think it's important for agreements to be in writing to protect both parties. So if you're a tenant and you are negotiating getting a property, I would always recommend that it's in writing, whether it's for 3 years or less. And some of the key terms that should be included, of course, the parties, and there should be a clear offer and acceptance. The description of the property is important. If possible, it should be clearly referenced to a plan. If it's in an apartment, then of course the particular unit should be included. The rent, of course, has to be indicated. Now, we know a lot of rents, particularly in prime areas, are denominated in dollars, but we know that, the currency of Ghana is the cedi. And the Bank of Ghana requirement, so that unless a landlord has a license from the Bank of Ghana to deal in foreign money, all of their agreements, all dealing should be in cedis. A lot of people get around that by perhaps saying the cedi equivalent of, let's say $5,000. Generally speaking, the currency of the day in Ghana is the cedi. So the tenancy agreement must also provide for clear obligations on both the landlord and the tenant's part. Okay, particularly repairing obligations. Normally, when it's an apartment block, for example, the landlord will have the responsibility to maintain the structure, and the tenant will be required to maintain the interior of the property. Insurance obligations are key, so that if it's an apartment, the landlord should be required to insure the whole building. The tenant should have the obligation to insure their fixtures and fittings. But if, for example, the tenant is renting a whole building, then it's more likely that the landlord would require the tenant to insure the building and just provide evidence of insurance to the landlord. So key repairing obligations, rent. Of course, for the tenant, they want to be able to ensure that they can have peaceful occupation of the property. So that's very important, that the tenant can enjoy their use of the property without unreasonable interference. From the landlord's perspective, they would want rights to access the property, and they should be limited. It should be limited to, for example, cases of emergency or if they need to repair, and there should be suitable obligations and provisions relating to rights of access. So unless it's an emergency, the landlord should provide reasonable notice if they need to access the property. So other than repairing, rent, insurance, also how can the tenant deal with the property? Is the tenant able to sign the property? Can they sublet? If the tenant wants flexibility, it's important that those provisions are contained in the tenancy agreement. Normally, landlords will not want the tenant to deal with the property at all without their consent. So that's generally, particularly for tenancy agreements of short periods of time, tenants are not able to assign or underlet at all, or if they have the ability, they need to obtain the landlord's prior written consent. And then also you will have provisions relating to how the property should be written at the end of the tenancy agreement. Normally, the tenant has the requirement to, maintain the property in good condition during the term of the tenancy, but then at the end of the term, they should also return the property in good repair. It doesn't have to be in perfect repair, but it should be in good repair, and fair wear and tear has to be acknowledged throughout the term of the tenancy, particularly if it's a longer term tenancy. So I'd say those are the key agreements and provisions that should be contained within the tenancy agreement.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Just a follow-up question. Is it okay to draft my tenancy agreement with AI?
Sorry, please say that again. The line wasn't very clear.
Hello. Is it okay for me to draft a tenancy agreement with AI?
Well, look, AI is something that we cannot ignore. I think you can use it as a good first draft, but AI is not foolproof. And you always should obtain professional expert advice and assistance, because AI, we know, makes several mistakes. So whilst I would say it's okay to produce a first draft of it, you will need to ensure that your draft complies with law, the legal requirements under law. And I would say that actually go to a lawyer. Providing drafting and reviewing tenancy agreements are not very expensive. So I would really recommend that you instruct a lawyer to either review or draft tenancy agreement on your behalf. But using AI as a first draft, fine. But to rely on it solely without professional assistance, I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, and then when we look at the verification process, how can a tenant verify that a landlord is the rightful owner of a property? I mean, I think we've heard various instances of people posing to be landlords that are in the rightful owners of the property. So how can a tenant navigate that situation?
So it's always important when a tenant is negotiating terms with a landlord, is interested in a property, the tenant should request the landlord's title documents, which would basically confirm their interest in the land. And then it's also important to do independent verifications and searches at the Lands Commission. Now, unfortunately, in Ghana, not all lands and interests are registered. There are key registration districts, so for example, Accra, Greater Accra region, certain parts of Kumasi. It's actually compulsory registration districts, and landowners should register their lands, but it doesn't always happen. So at the very minimum, you should request a copy of the landowner's title documents so you can review them. And then I would always recommend that you do searches at the Lands Commission to try and verify to see whether the landowner actually does own the land that they're purporting to let to you as a tenant.
Okay. Thank you. Then Delali, I'll come to you with similar question, but flipped in the reverse. How do you verify? Because I think you would. I think you would more likely be dealing on behalf of the landlord. So how do you verify the authenticity of a prospective tenant?
Yeah, so we have so during onboarding of tenants, for instance, we have information that we allow or we make the tenants provide, or the prospective tenants to provide during onboarding. So usually they provide their bank information, they provide their ID, Usually we also ask for their place of work. If they are from outside Ghana, we request a copy of their passports, where they work, and also some people even ask for police reports it's when you're dealing with certain people from certain places, you might want to get a full report of the people to know what's going on. If they don't provide it, we can also search for it ourselves just to know the history of the people that we are engaging. In my experience, this has also come up several times. Yeah, I've dealt with some funny individuals before, and we've had to pull up police reports. We've had to liaise with security agencies to find out more information about the people that we are dealing with. But all this is not to scare people away, but just to protect the tenants, the landlord or the properties in which people are staying in. Some of these properties that are offered are gated communities where people have kids working on the compound. So you need to know, we all need to do background checks on the people who we are onboarding into these properties for the best interests of our other tenants. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I come to Emmanuel now. So, Emmanuel, you happen to be in a very interesting position where there'll be times where you have to verify both parties. Uh, how do you navigate this? How do you go about this? Is navigating the prospective tenant, and then also, verifying the prospective tenant, and then also verifying the authenticity or um, legibility of the landlord.
Thank you, Patrick. All right. So in each of the cases, we try as much as possible to get more details of, each party before we even enter into any contractual agreement. Taking the tenant or the prospective tenant, not too different from what the Lally said. We make sure we request for certain documentation. If it's a local person, your Ghana card. If it's not even a non-Ghanaian, you need if you have a non-citizen Ghana card, fine. But your permit from the immigration service, how do you call it? Residence permit is important because we have people who entered, into the country illegally, and sometimes you have to leave some of them to do the right thing. So if it's a foreign person, your resident permit is important. Your passport is important. Your Ghana card, non-citizen Ghana card, if you have, you provide it. And then we try to liaise with some of the authorities. For instance, with the agency market, we have the Ghana Real Estate Agency Council, REAC, which is the authority that regulates the real estate market, especially when it comes to sales and rentals. Rent control is another office that you can conduct. Okay, I mean, that would be for the landlord, but for the tenant or the prospective tenant, basically these are some of the areas, and then the institution the individual works for. So, for instance, if you work for, let's say, a tech company, let's know the name of the tech company. Sometimes, depending on the duration and the type of person, we even request for some more information, like an introductory letter, just to make sure that we are accommodating or we have the right tenant. And at 1047, which is the Real Estate Agency Act, also requires every agent to do due diligence on every tenant or even home buyer before you proceed. Sometimes you even have to do extra due diligence, or you have to do the CDD as well, customer due diligence. So these are ways that we screen our prospective tenant before we, move ahead to enter into any contractual agreement. Now, when it comes to the homeowners, it is a duty of every real estate broker or real estate practitioner to make sure that sometimes we manage the properties through that, to make sure that the property owner is a rightful owner. So, like Elizabeth said, you need to establish the ownership. Unfortunately, like she said, not a lot of our properties are being registered with Lands Commission, but there are other areas that you can verify. For instance, if it's a gated community, you may want to contact the developer. For instance, if, say, Patrick, you have a property within Sylvester's development, and somebody is interested, we'll contact Sylvester to just make sure that, okay, did this person actually bought a property from you? Then we confirm this is part of the due diligence to make sure that that is the rightful owner of the property. There are some properties that people are holding in trust of others, or they are caretakers as well. You need to also establish the relationship between who is a beneficial owner or who does the process go to, so that you don't also go ahead, transact, and then the money falls into a wrong hand. So basically, this is my take, yes, on that.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for that information. So I'm going to put out a general question, and then maybe we can all take turns in a minute or two to answer. We've heard about lots of scams, unfortunately, within the industry. We know how common some of them can get. So for our friends, our families, you know, colleagues in the diaspora who are coming back home, want to at least start off by renting, what are some of the things they should look out for? So what are some of the safeguards that would work for them? Because most of them would be doing these things remotely. So wouldn't be necessarily here to do it physically. So what are some of the things they can, take into account to make sure that their eventual investments are protected? So I'll start with you, Emmanuel, if you can give us something in 2 minutes.
Are you starting with me?
Yes.
Okay. We have to understand that our market is a developing one, or is an upcoming market. In the past, we have had a lot of these issues of people scamming, prospective tenant, and others also being rip off their monies and stuff. But we have what we call regulation now, and I think it is one of the best news for the industry as we speak, because if you go according to what the law is saying, or go through the right procedure or processes, you save yourself a lot. So there is the Act 1047, which is the Real Estate Agency Act, which gave birth to the Real Estate Agency Council. That is an institution that is mandated to give licenses to qualified real estate brokers and agents. Now, this institution gives licenses to qualified brokers and agents. If you can go to their website, you can get the list of successful or qualified brokers that have licenses. And that is an area where you need to focus your attention on. Just to let a lot of people know that the Real Estate Agency Council is working, and in every transaction that has to do with real estate, you need to contact a real estate professional that is licensed, either a broker or an agent. If you contact a professional and you have any issue, it's easy to address it. On top of that, the organization I represent, which is the Ghana Real Estate Professionals Association, GREPA, this has been our focus, just to make sure that property owners get value for their money, property renters, property buyers also get value for money. So we try to make sure that we promote professionalism, ethics in business. If you contact somebody that is a member of the Ghana Real Estate Professionals Association, you know that that is a professional association or organization. Our code of ethics is even tied with the National Association of Realtors, because we have a bilateral with them. So you know that you are dealing with professionals. If you find yourself in the hands of professionals, you know that you are safe. But if you don't follow what the law is saying, what the act is saying, get professionals, deal with them, get a licensed person to work with, and then you go and have a transaction with somebody that is purported to be an agent or a broker who does not have a license or does not even know the owner of the property, then you are throwing the money away. Most of the time, people who face some of these challenges are the people who feel that I can do it on my own, or the social media is a large place. Somebody has found a property in their neighborhood. They take pictures, they post it on social media, Facebook, Instagram. You also go online, you see it, you showed interest, and you call the person, thinking that maybe you just find something small for the gentleman or the lady who posted it without going through the rightful channel. Some people want to run away from professional fees. Real estate brokerage, real estate agents is a profession. And it is not only brokers, you need a lawyer to also help you with the agreement that you are working with, just like Elizabeth said. So all these are professions that are supposed to help every transaction move smoothly for everybody's interest. And that is why some of us will have to go through the process of taking classes, the process of going through license processes and getting, a license to operate professionally. The council also mandates us to submit reports on regular basis. So you know that when all these things are done, there is a commitment on the part of the licensed broker. There's no licensed broker who run away with your money if you contact the right person. So in terms of scam, most people need to understand that there is a professional organization, GREPA, there is the government regulatory body that provide licenses, and you help yourself by saving yourself a lot of headaches or a lot of unsure. I mean, you save your money, you save yourself from every wahala. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I'll move on to Elizabeth. If you could share with us a few nuggets we can apply.
I think, as has been touched on, ensure that you engage a licensed professional. In terms of lawyers, you can go onto the Ghana Law Society website and Ghana Bar Association, where you can find lawyers that are actually in good standing. Not all lawyers are in good standing, so you need to ensure that if you're engaging a lawyer, that lawyer is in good standing and can actually practice. I think some practical steps for those in the diaspora is, if they're not able to come, to Ghana before they're negotiating their tenancy agreement, they should have somebody come and inspect the property, do the due diligence, actually go on site and make sure that a physical viewing is conducted. I think transactions that are rushed and where payments have to be made urgently, they should be seen as a red flag. Yes, there are times when, there is some urgency to some transactions, but generally, especially for high value transactions, you need to ensure that appropriate due diligence is undertaken. Cash-based transactions is also an issue. All payments, preferably, and actually the Act now provides for it, should be done via, through an authorized bank, so that you can also trace the payment. It's important that all transactions are conducted through official banking channels. As I previously said, it's important in terms of ownership, ensure that you do your independent verification at the Lands Commission. Some of these title documents that are being produced look authentic, they look genuine. Forgery is now becoming very sophisticated and common, so it's important that due diligence is undertaken. Of course, as I've said, ensure that you're using licensed lawyers and also licensed agents, and just engage professionals throughout the transaction to ensure that you're protected and that the professionals are acting for you ultimately, to ensure and minimize all issues and risk.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. And then Dalali, I'll come to you. What safeguards, what nuggets can you share with some of our friends in the diaspora? In case, let's say, someone wants to engage with Golden Coast developers, what are some of the things they can look out for?
Yeah, so as Golden Coast, we've actually worked with a lot of diasporans, and most of the work that we do with diasporans is even remote. So the main thing that makes us stand out is that we have a lot of video tours available of our properties. So they can get them through. We also have our registered agents that we are affiliated with, who are affiliated with us. You can verify our agents with us. You can also verify us through our agents. So that link is there. And anybody in the diaspora can have access to these links, and then they can deal directly with the the agents who can give them video tours, who can give them full explanation of what they have to do. And also, like the others have said, um, if you're not sure of the agents, verify your agents. Make sure that you go to the correct bodies. Emmanuel mentioned a few, and then always involve a lawyer. Always make sure a lawyer is involved. A lot of our our buyers, especially, they involve their lawyers in every step of the process just to verify and just to make sure that they are going down the right path. You don't you do not allow anybody to lead you astray. If you have a family representative here who can come around and look at the progress of some of our construction works, that's fine. We allow it here as long as it's scheduled. So your own people, somebody you trust, staying within Ghana can come around and take a tour of the place. They can use their own phone so that they don't have to depend on our own video tours. That's like a second layer of verification that they can use to further cement the fact that the deal is real. So people, yes, there are a lot of fake agents. I've actually dealt with a few previous workplaces. It's a very nasty experiences. I've I've had a lot of bad experiences with people who are trying to bring down the industry. It's sad actually with what's going on. People people even raising prices exorbitantly way above even what we offer, and it's a problem. But from what Emmanuel is saying, it looks like we're on the right track. People need to verify some of these agents, and a lot of these agents are actually not even they are not even affiliated to any particular bodies. So I believe that even if there's any agent in the chat who is or in the on the call who is listening to us right now, they should also get enrolled in any agent bodies to give them extra extra credence so that at least things get regulated and things get better with our industry. But for us, we have our safeguards, we have our agents, we have video tours. If you have somebody within Ghana that you trust, let them come by, let them let them, they can come and talk to any of the staff, they can do video tours, and then we can get to enjoy the fruits of our of what we are building here. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think the key thing is verification of individuals and the properties involved, and then using the professionals for what they have to do. So getting the right people involved in the processes. I think we're at the last section of our conversation, which is rights, responsibilities, and the law. We spoke a bit about the tenancy agreements earlier, what clauses are non-negotiable. Elizabeth touched on that. So I'll start with Elizabeth. What steps can a tenant take if a landlord refuses to carry out necessary repairs?
Well, it's important, first of all, you need to look at the terms of the tenancy agreement and see what responsibilities the landlord has and what responsibilities the tenant has. If clearly the repairs are within the remit of the landlord, then it's important to bring the issues to the landlord's notice. Okay, first and foremost, it's reasonable to give the landlords a bit of time to undertake the works, but clearly, if it's an emergency, it should be done, as soon as possible. It's important that the tenant documents everything. So where they are needing to communicate with the landlord, don't just do it by phone, do it by text messages, do it in writing, so that there's a record of the requirements for the repairs to be undertaken, maybe take photographs of the disrepair, and in terms of all the communication with the landlord, so that it's in writing. If the landlord still fails to comply with his obligations, then it's possible to file a complaint with the rent control department. And then, of course, that would then be taking the issue through their processes. And the rent control department, they have a mediation service where they try and resolve all issues between landlords and tenants. Hopefully that would be able to deal with the issue, but I know there are issues in terms of capacity and timing. If it's not possible for that to be resolved, I know sometimes tenants want to try and withhold the rent, but that also comes with issues, because you will normally find that in tenancy agreements, there's not really the ability for the tenant to withhold the rent in the event that the landlord has failed to comply with its obligations. So if the tenancy allows for example, dispute mediation, that should be done. If it allows for the tenant to do the works and then claim the monies back from the landlords, that should also be looked at. So it really does depend on what the provisions of your tenancy agreement says. I would say not many people resort to the rent control authority. It doesn't just deal with rent, it does deal with just general obligations that the landlords are not complying with. And if that fails, then perhaps you'd have to escalate the issue to rent tribunal or to court. But what's important is that your tenancy agreement offers some level of protection. So it's always better, as I said, to try and engage with a lawyer who can provide reasonable protections for a tenant where the landlord is not complying with its obligations. But those are generally the steps that you take. You need to look at your tenancy agreement, see what it provides in terms of what the obligations are on the part of the landlord. If you can withhold your rent, fine. If there's not a provision to do that, it's a chicken and egg situation. You see, you also don't want to be in a position whereby you're withholding rent and that gives the landlord the right to terminate. So it's always important to document the disrepair, serve notice on your landlord to try and get the landlord to remedy any defects. If you need to take them to rent control, do that to see if their mediation service can assist. If not, then you may have to escalate it to the courts.
Okay, thank you. So I'm still staying with you. You mentioned what the terms in the agreement provide. So what are lawful grounds for eviction, and what is the notice period that the landlord is required to give?
So the Rent Act provides quite a lot of grounds for eviction, aside from what your tenancy agreement may say. So some of the main grounds are, of course, if the rent is overdue by a specific period of time, if there's a breach of the tenancy agreement, if the tenant is using their premises for immoral or illegal use, if the property has deteriorated more than fair wear and tear. So if it's as a result of, the tenant's waste or neglect or default, If also, for example, the landlord actually needs the property back to use, let's say if it's a residential property, there is grounds for the landlord to require the property for its own personal use, then that's a ground. If it's a commercial property and the lease has expired and perhaps the landlord requires the premises for its own business purposes, then on that there's 6 months written notice that the landlord has to provide. But strictly speaking, under the Rent Act, I mean, there are quite a few provisions. Those are the key ones. But you would need to get a court order in order to evict somebody under the Rent Act.
Okay.
And you'd
Thank
need to
you.
prove one of the grounds set out in the Rent Act. So it's not possible just for a landlord to go onto the premises and try and chuck out their tenant. Under the Rent Act, there is a process that has to be followed.
Okay, thank you. So Galadi, I'll come to you. In your case and situation where you possibly, I mean, you manage properties for your homeowners, how do you navigate this?
Yeah, so with this, the stipulations given within the tenancy agreements are very, very crucial. For me, a big thing for me, and especially with everything I do, are safeguarded according to the provisions given in the tenancy agreement. So I'm big on agreements. Before I even give out any tenancy, I even make sure that I customize the agreement based on what each and every single individual tenant requires. Each tenant might have different tastes and preferences and ways of going about different things. For instance, I've dealt with a tenant who has had a stipulation whereby, and some people might even know this, whereby if there is any issue within the building where the tenants might deem it unfit to stay in, the landlord would actually have to get an alternative accommodation for that person till the issue is fixed. This has come up several times, and for such people, you cannot give them the same agreements. So we actually have to customize the agreements to suit each and every tenant that we onboard. So with that, it's quite interesting because there are responsibilities for the landlord and then responsibilities for the tenants. With tenants, for instance, they have responsibilities that are outside the maintaining the structural components of the buildings that they are renting. So, for instance, it's not usually taken that you do not make any structural changes to the building, at least without the landlord's approval. You cannot make any changes. Like for instance, some landlords even prefer that you don't even change the color of the paint. All these are considered depending on who exactly you are renting from or the initial agreement that was made. So it goes down a whole lot. So uh, with most people, they usually go with the fact that nobody, most tenants uh, keep the properties clean. They don't litter the compounds. They notify the landlord of any defects or repairs, even if it's minor or major. If the tenant even has to pay for it, maybe the landlord has a particular quality or a state that he would like to maintain his residence in or his buildings in. So it also goes that way. And there's also consent before any alterations are made. Like I said earlier, sometimes even with paint, some people are very sensitive to that. So you might even have to deliberate with the landlord or get his consent before making any changes. Other than that, when the tenant is moving out, the provision stated within the tenancy agreement is that um, during handing over, both the tenant and the landlord go through the building, then they do an inspection. Usually, tenants leave a security deposit, and some agreements stipulate that whatever that is, the tenant is responsible for should be taken out of that security deposit. So it's very vital that everything is included, or the tenancy agreement is broad enough to capture all these things, to make sure that from onboarding, there's an inspection of the site to make sure that everything um, everything that is within the building is maintained in a particular way from the time that it was met to the time that they are moving out, especially when it comes to regular wear and tear or things that might be damaged during the period. Some people might not even, some landlords might not even charge for it, but some will. And all these are stated within the tenancy agreement. So for me, the tenancy agreement is the binding factor to all this. You need to have a very good tenancy agreement as a landlord. That's if there are any landlords listening. And then tenants, if you're also renting, make sure that all these stipulations are given within your tenancy agreement. I believe that every tenancy agreement should be proactive in providing accommodation for onboarding and then moving out, so that when people are moving out, there isn't any fight or quarrel over this was in this state, this was in that state. No, everything must be captured in the tenancy agreement. And from day one, everybody must agree on what the state of the property is. So that on the final day, because with rentals, there will be a last day, everybody can leave, part ways peacefully. There have been issues that I've had even up to today that have been lasting for several years, whereby people have come into buildings and then issues have come up, issues where it wasn't clear on whose responsibility it was to take care of certain things. Like for instance, people put signages on buildings that have claddings, but when you take off the signage, it leaves holes in the claddings. Now, whose responsibility is it to fix all that? That's why for me, it's very important that all that is contained within the tenancy agreement. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for an insightful conversation. I think I've learned a lot myself. And in wrapping up, I'm just going to put out our last question, where I want all of you to respond to, as briefly as possible, so we can take a few questions. So for tenants in a bad situation, rental situation right now, what is one immediate action they can take within the week in the path to remedy the situation? And I'll start with Emmanuel.
I didn't get a question quite well. If you can take it again.
So,
Yeah.
so for tenants currently in a bad rental situation, what one immediate action can they take to start to remedy the situation?
Okay, so depending on how they entered into the agreement, but first of all, the first point of call is the rent control department. So if a tenant is in a bad situation with a landlord, whatever situation it is, the best organization or institution to contact is the rent control to ascertain what the fact of the matter is, what the challenges are, so that whatever it is can be remedied. That is the very first thing to do. You can, depending on the case or the situation, you can also seek a legal advice, so that you know whether, how to handle it, whether by arbitration or going to the court. But a legal person can help you out. And you may also want to talk to a professional broker, not to maybe to help you understand the nature of the agreement you've entered into, because maybe there may be a few things that are missing. And if you have some of these engagements, you have a better understanding or clarity on what to do. So it is important to also contact a professional broker. Ghana Real Estate Professionals Association is an organization you can reach out, or better still, the Real Estate Agency Council, to get clarity on some of these things. But in all, the first point is the rent control department. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you. Elizabeth, what would your advice be?
I would say probably just review the lease terms, and then, if, of course, if you need immediate assistance, then I would seek legal advice promptly. I would also, communicate with the landlord. I think early and open communication is always important to try and prevent escalation of issues. But definitely review your lease, seek legal advice promptly, communicate with the landlord, and just ensure that you preserve all evidence and documents in terms of the correspondence that you have had with your landlord. And yes, as has been said, the rent control is also another avenue, or an agent, but probably look at your lease terms. It does depend on what the issue is, but seeking professional advice promptly is important.
Okay, thank you. And then Dalali.
Yeah, so yeah, I thought you wouldn't ask me this, since most of the time I'm the bad person in this situation. So yes, it's like I even said in my previous response, on both sides, everybody needs to take note, or take into account what is within the property, the state of the property. For a bad situation, it could be anything. I've had several. Most of the time, when tenants are in bad situations, they tend to shy away from even talking to the representative of the the estate, or the landlord, like myself. But that never does anything good. At the end of the day, I have to come in and be a bad person in that situation. So the best thing to do is come approach the person. I don't have to be chasing you with phone calls. I don't have to be chasing with emails, pasting things on your gates. No, it's not cool. At the end of the day, we are all human beings. We all have family members. We all have hearts, beating hearts. We all have blood flowing through our veins. So you just talk to us. You don't have to hide behind the gate, or when you see me approaching, then you back your car into the house. No, it's not cool. So at the end of the day, dialogue is very important. Dialogue is very important. If you feel like you've been wronged in any way, you can save the chats, or in as part of my tenancy agreements, I always include that any disputes with the landlord should have to pass through some form of arbitration. So it's very important that everybody sits down. You bring a witness, I bring a witness, and then we all sit down and try and hash things out before it even gets to rent control or the courts. Dialogue is very important. At the end of the day, we can all come to an agreement. There could be a payment plan if the tenant is defaulting. If there's been some damage that has occurred without the landlord's approval, we can talk about it. We can talk about it. So you don't have to always run to the authorities, because at the end of the day, and this is also very important, agents, when you bring tenants, or when you after you payment has been made, don't just run off with your commission. It's very important that when these things happen, agents are also involved in trying to resolve these issues. Because at the end of the day, for instance, most of the agents are actually my friends, because we actually work together. They bring me a lot of business, and then we actually communicate a lot. So when you're having issues, don't just run away from the landlord. You can even approach your agent. The agents can even know how to talk to me, or how to even get me. to even agree on something. So you can also involve the agents. And even when I was in school, we also learned that agents are a very important part of conflict resolution when it comes to the relationship between tenants and then landlords. So it's very important that agents also play their role in hashing out some of these things. It's not always that you have to just run to the authorities or go to court. Some of these issues can be resolved very easily. I had an issue with the family. Their bigger brother was the one who rented a property, and he wasn't in the country. So for months, they had actually they actually agreed to continue their rental term, but they were making payments. And then their big brother, who was actually the whose name was on the lease, was out of the country. So I tried chasing the guys down for a while. I couldn't get them. My bosses were on my neck for the rent and all that. And then I actually got somebody to actually call the agent who brought them. And then she gave me the connect to the bigger brother who was out of the country. And within days, the issue was squashed just like that. Nobody had to go to rent control. Nobody had to call the police. People actually asking me to call the police and involve authorities. But that's not the case. At the end of the day, we are all human beings and things can be solved. So, yeah.
Thank you, thank you so much. Thank you all for your submissions. We have a few questions in the chat box. I'll put out, and then we can give our final words before we wrap up. So the first one is from Phoebe. I think, Elizabeth, this is directed to you. She says, I didn't know there was a Ghana Bar Association rate. Where can we find that, please?
Should be able to find it on their website, but I can also share it with Aspora. I'm not sure if I can put it in the chat, but I can share it with Aspora so that it can be circulated. But you should be able to find it on the Ghana Bar Association's website. The latest scale of rates, I believe, is from 2022. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So Phoebe on the Ghana Bar Association website. Great. The second one is from Jones, and I think I'll throw that to Emmanuel. He says, when a client rents, how does that agent come in with respect to the rent control card?
Right. So the rent card is supposed to be document for both the tenant and the homeowner. At the time the rent card was introduced in 1963, the Real Estate Agency Council was not in existence. So they made little provision for agent. In fact, in our previous engagement, the commissioner of the rent control said the commission is even giving the mandate to even rent properties. But now with the existence of the Real Estate Agency Act, we know that things are changing and the two institutions need to work together. Now, with respect to the rent control, the card, as a broker, you need to keep a copy for your record purposes. So if you are renting a property for a client and you lead a person to get the rent card stating, all the details on it, the amount, the type of property, the tenant will have it. The tenant will have a copy, the homeowner will have a copy as well. You as a broker also need to keep a copy for future references and for reporting purposes, knowing that this is the person whom I've rented the property to. It also gives you some form of credibility of your profession that you are doing, meaning that you know what your work is about. And so you need to have a copy or help the tenants get the rent card, and you need to have a copy as well. And a little to add to what Delali said earlier regarding the agents and the taking commission and not showing up again. If you come to our association, the work of the agent or the broker never ends because you have to be with a client throughout the period. And there are clients that I personally have handled for the past 5 years, for the past 7 years, and the relationship keep growing, and that is how you even get more business. So if you introduce, a tenant to a homeowner and you leave them there, then that is business you are losing out there yourself. You need to keep the relationship. You need to be with them throughout the process. If they have issues, you need to help them out. And that is how our industry grows, or the profession, grows. So that is a little I wanted to add to that. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. The last question is from Phoebe, who says, uh, I think anyone can take this question and answer it briefly. How much is not cost because it ends up being the tenant's bill, and the landlord might lose business. So Phoebe, I don't know if you can clarify what cost exactly you mean. But while we wait for Phoebe to do that, if there's anyone else who has a question, I think now would be a good time to ask. We have just about 10 more minutes to end this webinar. Yes, Phoebe, I meant to ask, how much is not expensive? Are you talking about the rent that has to be paid, or is there something else in particular you want a response to? Okay. So while we wait for Phoebe, for all of us participating on this call, we are putting in a survey in the chat box, and we would appreciate it if you could all fill it for us. What these surveys do for us is they help us curate more sessions like this that fit your needs, and give us the opportunity to bring in more professionals to address some of the concerns we have. So we have a webinar series at least once a quarter, sometimes more. So 4 times in a year, or at least 4 times in a year, and we touch on different topics in this. I think the first one we did this year was on agribusiness. This is our second webinar that is touching on the rental market, and we'll continue to have such engagement in the future. So if you can please take out a few minutes, just about 2 to 5 minutes, to fill out the survey for us, we'll appreciate it. And this will help us curate more sessions that would be of interest for you. Okay, so Phoebe has come back, and I think this is to Elizabeth. She says, the lady says, okay, so Elizabeth says we should always get the money to deal with the legal part of the engagement. And she said it's not that expensive. So she's asking what the cost are. And I think you can find if there's anything that should
So as I said, there's the Ghana Bar Association rates. I mean, I think I've practiced in the UK, and I know that sometimes because the markets are different, a transaction perhaps that you might do in the UK that is done here, the fees may be more expensive because everything is more everything is electronic. It's more regularized. There's better enforcement, and so the process is a bit more straightforward in the UK. So, for example, for a conveyancing transaction, you may not spend, I don't want to say you may not spend, for example, $1,000 perhaps for a conveyancing transaction. Of course, it depends on the value of the property. But because things are a bit more streamlined in the West, the prices tend to be a bit lower. In Ghana, I think the due diligence on the part of both the agents and the lawyers, sometimes it's problematic because, as we've kind of indicated, lands are not registered. You need to do more due diligence to ascertain who the owner is. And so because of that, and because the Lands Commission is not an electronic a registry. Everything is manual. The level of due diligence that has to go into a transaction, and here I'm not just talking about leasing, but acquisitions as well. It's a lot more detail that has to go in, and so the fees may be on the higher side. So when I say expensive, I should say everything is relative to everybody's pocket. So I understand that. But I think your first point of call is to look at the Ghana Bar Association rates. Okay. That generally is what lawyers, I'm talking on the perspective of legal work here, is what lawyers should benchmark their fees on. I'm not saying that lawyers always stick to that to the letter, but generally speaking, that is a remit of fees that at least is a benchmark that you can kind of see if you're being quoted a fee, whether it's on the high side or it's more reasonable. So as I said, if you look on the website, the Ghana Bar Association's website, you should find the scale of fees there. But I know expense is relative to everybody's pocket. But yes, please check that as your first point of call when you're being given a fee quote when it comes to legal fees.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that response. And that brings us to a very insightful conversation where we learned a lot about the rental market. We learned so much from all of our analysts from the different branches in the industry. And I think the key thing we take away from here is you can negotiate your rental advance. It's not cast in stone. It's always very important to verify. Verification is very important. I think it's at least the first step in doing anything. And I think the most important point is to use the professionals for the right things. Don't try to do everything by yourself. It might cost you a bit in the beginning, but it's better than having to pay a bit more later in the future. So thank you all once again for joining.